Thank you, DJ. We didn't actually see each other's presentations, but it's quite amazing how well these are going to work together. So that was a great introduction to my session. So my session is more about getting a little bit deeper into DevOps, talking about DevOps maturity and what that looks like, and how you can assess your own maturity and then grow and transform your own culture, as it were, as in DevOps. I think that's a great way to put it. It's a culture of DevOps. So first off, who am I? Chris Marzilli, VP Customer Success here at Flosum, but I'm a lifelong New Englander, so I just took the train down this morning. I have a little over 15 years in the Salesforce ecosystem. I was a customer. I started off as an accidental admin. I completely agree. Admins have all the power. That's true now and probably forever. But I was a partner for a while. I was an employee for Salesforce for about 9 years. And then I landed here at Flosum just a few months ago. I've really enjoyed it. A couple, key things for me. I have a whole bunch of Salesforce certifications. I helped build the platform app builder certification. So I have any app builders in the room? Usually I get a few over there. Thank you. I joined Flosum back in April, and my favorite feature of Flosum, you guys haven't used Flosum, my favorite feature when I saw it was the rollback, the one-click rollback in Flosum, which might tell you a little bit how good of a coder I was. That's my favorite feature. But these are all pretty amazing accomplishments, given the fact that I'm only about 22 years old. All right, he was laughing a little bit too hard. Okay, thank you.
I'm doing too much.
Yeah. All right, so I think we already covered this, but I always like to kind of level set. I think DJ did a really good job, much better than I'll do right now. But what is DevOps? Really, it's when you bring together some key aspects of your organization, right? Your development, your IT operations, your quality and assurance. You bring that all together, and you have a DevOps culture. And some of the key principles for Salesforce include continuous integration, environment management. All right, so you have a lot of different environments in Salesforce. Testing automation, collaboration is a big piece of it. People think DevOps is just a process, but it's also about the people that run the process. So collaboration, audit and compliance is huge. People don't think about that sometimes when they put in a DevOps process. They think it's just about delivering code to an end user, right? No, there's going to be audit and compliance as part of that. So if that's DevOps, what is DevOps maturity? So I thought about this question a lot over the last few weeks, and I put together a maturity model that I would like you all to kind of take a look at it and think about it and do your own assessment as we go. We have some later time today to do an assessment, but as I go, think about where you might sit. So the way I set this up is I built a model, and I'll start with the first base area. So this is stage one base. That's the stage name. The description is really you have little or no defined process. You're just starting out, right? And the tool you're using is most likely in the Salesforce world change sets. You're just shipping code and configure around with change sets. You have some characteristics of this type of maturity or lack of maturity, really. And that is, you're probably using shared sandboxes, or you're doing changes directly in production. Who's ever done that? No one in here, right? That's never happened. And you're probably not even doing conflict management. You might even be overwriting stuff. One developer deploys something that overwrites another developer. Very common in this stage. And then you're probably doing manual testing. If you're doing any testing, you might just be shipping code. Typically the value or lack thereof value at this level is it's very manual and time consuming to do deployments. They usually don't go the first time. You run that change set, it does the validation. You don't have all the test code you need, or you're missing a component. You're missing a dependency. You have to create a new change set and start your deployment all over again. And ultimately, you're not delivering business value, the lack of business value. That's stage one. So stage two, now we get into the emerging area. You're starting to look at some tools and some processes to prevent some of that lack of business value that you've seen in stage one. You're probably using a version control system, right? At this point, you're probably still using change sets. Maybe you're using DX or the Salesforce CLI, as they now call it, to help with that. Hopefully at this point, you started thinking about maybe using a little bit more sandboxes, but you're probably still sharing sandboxes amongst developers and admins. But more collaboration is happening at this level, and you're starting to do some testing to help avoid conflicts, because that's one of the most painful things when you end up with conflicts, either in pre-production UAT environments or in production, which is very dangerous when you start getting conflicts and overwriting each other's code, right? And the focus here tends to be just squarely on agility. You're just like, how do I get out stuff fast and quickly to the business? You're not too worried about security or any of those other aspects. You just want to be agile. And at this point, you start maybe experimenting with some different tools. Maybe you're using Ant tools or some other tools like Workbench that Salesforce provides. At this point, your value is, the releases are still taking long, but maybe not as long as before. At very least, because you're using a version control system, now your metadata is backed up. So you have a little bit more security and a reduction of risk. And I'm a big fan of reducing risk. As we move up the model, now we're thinking about practicing. Now we're actually have a defined DevOps process, right? That's focused around user stories. At this point, you're probably actually gathering real requirements and writing your user stories and linking that to the work you're doing, right? At this point, you are maybe not completely, but you're starting to leverage continuous integration and or continuous delivery tools. And you're actually thinking about using some testing tools well here. Hopefully at this point, you've now moved to individual developer sandboxes. I'm a big proponent of this. I like, when I develop, I want my own little sandbox, and I don't want anybody to play in that sandbox. I don't want stuff changing on me. And that's actually, some customers think that's a burden. I see it as a freedom, right? Because I get to do what I want in my sandbox, and then I can ship my code where I need to ship it, and I just have to ship what I changed, right? And then you have an integration environment where everybody comes together and manages their conflicts. At this point, you're probably thinking or starting to do peer code reviews. That's really important, right? So that way you're making sure that everybody's shipping the same kind of standard and quality code. That's very important. Defining your integration and testing environments. So again, if you have those individual sandbox environments, now you have integration environments where all of your code gets together, you get tests, you ensure that you don't have conflicts or any overwrites. At this point, you pretty much need, if you're doing that, you need to have a good branching strategy defined. Whatever tool you're using for version control, every one of them has a way to do branching. Flosum's tool, by the way, is very kind of agnostic. You can do many different types of branching strategies. And the same with Git and other tools like that, Azure DevOps have a lot of flexibility in your branching strategies, but you need to have a strategy. That's the most important thing. And then you're beginning to define your testing strategy, and maybe you're even doing a little testing automation. And maybe you're running your tests more often or on a regular basis as things happen. And now you start thinking about compliance and auditing and how you do that, right? You're probably manually collecting your audit and compliance data. And that's probably a very laborious task, but that's typically where we all start, because one day someone knocks on your door and they're an auditor and they say, hey, by the way, we have to be SOX compliant. I need all this information. And so they need it all by the end of the quarter. So you just start manually kind of pecking and clicking around and set up to find all the information for that audit. And that's typically what happens in this phase. And it's not really automated just yet. And now you're starting to think about, hey, we need to start shipping standard data, testing data sets to our developers to make sure everybody's testing with the same data set. And it's a standard data set so that developers, A, aren't using different ones, and B, aren't creating their own every time and having to recreate the wheel. And then you probably thinking about defining a backsyncing process at this point, because you've struggled with, hey, my sandbox environment is not the same as production, and I don't want to refresh it right now, because when I refresh the sandbox, that creates a lot of extra work, right? For developers, I have to redo any integrations I have to have. I might have to feed data into it, and I don't want to do all that work. So why don't we create a backsyncing process? Typically, that's probably manual now by maybe cloning a branch that just went to production, or doing some sort of org compare and bring that metadata into your development environment. And it's very manual, but very useful, because it can be a lot easier than having to refresh and reset up an org. At this point, you're starting to see some real value, right, at the maturity level as far as DevOps go. And that's, you see some increased velocity here. You see a reduction of overwrites, and hopefully that leads to smoother production releases, and ultimately a reduction in your risk, especially as you go from production, because you have some quality and some stage gates involved. Now, we're getting to optimize. So we're really moving up the scale here, and we have a lot of stuff that we're now adding to our DevOps process. You have basically a fully optimized and defined process that the whole team is aware of. It has a good culture behind it. It's enabling innovation, but with speed and quality. Okay, innovation is not useful if it's not what the business needs at the time they need it, right? If it's too late, it's not really that innovative. And if it doesn't work, it's not that innovative, even if the business can't leverage it. So it has to be quality. So innovation is great, but it also needs to come with speed and quality. At this point, you're fully leveraging your CI and CD tools. You have continuous integration. You should have continuous delivery. You most likely have some code analysis, some static or maybe even automated static code analysis. And at this point, you're probably protecting your data. A lot of people don't think about this. To have a really truly smooth process as far as DevOps delivery goes, you need to make sure you have some sort of data management and data protection involved here. So you have data backup and restore, and that includes both production data and test data and also metadata. All of those things that are included when I talk about data management and backing up and restoring that and having copies of that data, because it can be really easy with Salesforce to lose data. I'm not saying I did this, but I heard of somebody who did this that maybe was writing, thought they were working in production and maybe wrote an Apex statement that happened to delete all the opportunities in an environment. And maybe they thought they were running that on the sandbox, but really they had their production window open and they might have deleted all their opportunities in all of their Salesforce. And just think about that for a second. That is a really scary thing, especially if you don't have a backup. I happen to know that that developer had a backup and was able to upload all of those opportunities back into Salesforce in just a few minutes. Thank God they had a backup and a good process. Of course, being able to run Apex in production probably says that maybe they didn't have the greatest process, but at least they had the backup. At this point, you're probably doing frequent releases. I always get asked the question, well, what does frequent releases mean? Does that mean I release every day, every week, or every month? You know, that's not really a question that anybody can answer. It's really, what does that mean to you and your business? What is frequent to your business and how fast they need to move? There's a great book called Release 10 Times a Day, which I would highly recommend you guys take a look at and read. I think that's a little bit overkill, but that was the point, is that we want to release so fast that we're releasing 10 times a day. I think releasing daily or weekly, to me, that's frequent, right? Some customers feel like, you know, you might be in a highly regulated space that requires a lot of testing, and they think monthly is frequent. I can get on board with that. Anything more than monthly, though, I really can't get on board as far as is it frequent. But you have to define that, what that means for yourself. So at this point, you have automated and enforced quality gates. So you actually can stop a release from happening in any environment up the chain, you know, from production down to pre-production, UAT, integration, because they don't pass certain quality gates. And those could be peer reviews, those could be code analysis, static code scans, any type of code security that you might have in place can actually prevent something from being released until that issue is fixed before it can move forward. You're hopefully at this point, you're doing a lot of detailed analytics, because that's how you know where you are and how you can grow. Those analytics can include KPIs, DORA. For those of you who don't know DORA, I'm going to talk about DORA metrics in just a second. But DORA metrics are a great way to kind of judge where you are as far as release cadence and efficiency. And then any ROI metrics that you might have. These are ones that are typically hard to define for me with my customers, because it can vary from different customers in different industries. What is your ROI on your DevOps process? So you need to kind of define that and then track it. And like I talked about, data protection and recovery capabilities. Have you actually tested? So you might be backing up your data. Have you actually tested a recovery? Have you simulated the loss of data, you know, in a sandbox? Don't do what I did, but test it, delete something from a sandbox. Can you restore from a backup that's not another sandbox environment or that's not production? You know, test those capabilities. And then you have an automated backsync process. And by automated, it can still have a little bit of manual piece to it. Sometimes developers might be picky and they say, well, no, don't backsync me until I'm ready. And then they raise their hand and they say, I'm ready. And then a release manager can come along and push it. But you can have it automated as things are moving to production. They can get backsynced to all of your environments in an automated fashion. Here now we're seeing enabled innovation with speed and quality with reduced risk, right? So all of these things you're doing ultimately allow you to reduce your risk and deliver confidently quality code and quality customizations to your end users, ultimately your customers. Now, there's even another level, and it talks to DevSecOps, right? So this is what I call the leading level. You know, creating synergies that result in resiliency, allowing for adaptability and allowing teams to scale and disrupt efficiently. We've moved from innovation to really disruption, right? And the key tool here, now obviously you're using all of these tools along the chain as we move up, but the key tool here is a security posture management tool that allows you to really track how you're securing your environments. You probably at this point have a defined feedback cycle for improving your DevOps process. Constantly improving is one of the key traits of kind of being this leading category. You have a fully implemented DevSecOps that supports compliance and your automated needs. So you're thinking about that in advance. And the whole shift left mentality you should be, at this point, using that security posture management tool to be scanning not just production, but your lower level environments. Maybe not all the way down to the individual developer sandbox, but surely your integration environments, your UAT environments, your pre-prod environments, that when changes happen that violate your security posture or your compliance, you get alerted, right? And you have an incident response and remediation plans for when that happens. And I'm talking that you have these plans ahead of getting that. You shouldn't be in a position where you have an incident and you are then flying by the seat of your pants to figure out how you address that. You should already have remediation plans in place such that an incident happens, someone opens up the plan and says, this is what we do, step one, right? That should already be defined. And hopefully your tool will alert you early enough in the process. Now, not to pitch Flosum, but Flosum does have a tool that will scan your environments and you can set your security posture levels and you can scan, again, not just production, but all of your lower level environments as well. So that way, as changes happen, if a developer were to try to push a change into, say, an integration environment that gives too much access to a certain group of users, an incident would be created, a remediation task would get created, and they would revert that change. Or at that point, you probably meet together as a team, talk about why this change was made, and maybe then you adjust your security posture because you have a new use case or a new business case that allows you to open up security in a defined way, right? Not a willy-nilly way, right? You have to define it because we've said these are our these are our guardrails that our security is working in, and we now might want to change those guardrails. Or you say, nope, these are our guardrails, revert the change, figure out a different way to go ahead and address that use case. So at this point, you're now bringing together your people, your process, and your technology to maximize your innovation and business value. I think that's really where culture comes in, right? You bring together all three of these things to truly have what I would call a leading DevOps maturity model. So, the question now becomes, where are you on this scale, right? So first off, why should you even measure where you are in DevOps? Oh, I have a tool, we're using continuous delivery. I don't need to measure this. Well, there's a lot of good reasons to measure where you are in this maturity model. Let's start with a few things that it's going to help you with by putting yourself in this model. First, it'll benchmark your performance. It'll let you know where you are. Second, it'll enhance team alignment. I guarantee you, if you put this model in front of 10 developers that work on the same project and you put them in separate rooms and you say, where are we on this model? You'll probably get 4 or 5 different answers. Right? And that's actually not helpful because you want to be aligned and you want to say, this is where we are, and have the whole team kind of say, this is where we are, right? And then once you know where you are, you can identify areas where you need to improve. Now, everything I listed here might not be a priority for your company or for your process. You need to decide for yourselves, what's the priority and what are the features that we're going to focus on first? And then we backlog everything else, right? Just like in a normal agile process. Once you identify those areas of improvement and you've prioritized them, that helps you develop a long-term roadmap, all right? And that roadmap should have clear goals and benefits. Where are we going to get to? We're going to do static code analysis. Is that the next thing? Are we going to implement our security posture management? Is that the next critical feature, right? But you'll develop that roadmap. And I'm a big proponent of believing that IT should get, and Salesforce delivery should get some user stories too. As part of every sprint, you should get some percentage, could be as small as 5%, maybe 10%, that you get to improve your process and improve your delivery. And we'll talk about why, sometimes the business doesn't give you those 5%. We can talk about some ROI metrics. You could demonstrate some ROI from this to show why you should get that percentage of every sprint to improve your metrics. Now, the maturity model can lead to a number of different things if used correctly, right? It should boost your workflow and efficiency. As you move up the model, there's almost no way that you could not be more efficient, right? It will reduce your time to market. It'll increase your velocity. It's going to speed up your release cycles. It should overall enhance your product quality, right? So you should be able to go from a place where maybe you're getting a lot of bugs in production to a place where you're dealing with those bugs much earlier in your process and you're releasing quality code to the business. It should increase test accuracy because you're doing more testing and you're automating your testing. And it should provide you ultimately with a competitive edge, right? You should be able to continuously improve so that your delivery team is seen as a kind of a gold standard amongst all the different delivery teams. And I'm not just talking about delivery for Salesforce, I'm talking about delivery for really any kind of IT project. There's some real key business benefits. So if the business won't give you time to work, give you some sprint time to work on your DevOps process, you can bring some of these benefits, if not all of them, to them. So, every business wants to be able to rapidly adapt to frequent changes. What business isn't changing? I mean, very few businesses have been static, especially since the COVID years. Things have been changing rapidly. Workforce has been contracting and expanding rapidly, leading to a lot of changes in business. So I don't know of any business that doesn't want to frequently change and gain business agility, right? Your IT process can remain flexible and agile. Anytime I get involved in a broken process where they say, oh, our Salesforce doesn't work, or Salesforce is terrible, I can almost guarantee you behind that is a very rigid IT structure and process that doesn't allow for flexibility. This moving up the maturity model should allow for a lot of flexibility and innovation. Operational effectiveness accompanied by accelerated delivery pace, so you can deliver faster and you'll be more operationally effective. You should be able to do more with less. What business doesn't want to do more with less? Reduce overall risk in your process. I can tell you right now, as a VP, risk is something that is like a 4-letter word to me. I don't like risk. I want to reduce risk as much as possible. I think every business leader wants to reduce risk. You'll improve the overall quality of your products. If you haven't been delivering quality to your business, using this maturity model can help you deliver a better quality and save time. Because ultimately, every time you don't deliver a quality product to the business, it costs you time and it costs the business time. Maybe it's buggy and it doesn't work, or maybe it doesn't meet their requirements. That costs everybody time in the whole business. And then you receive continuous feedback, incremental upgrades, automation, and culture. So basically, you continuously improve your process. Again, these are great business cases for allowing the business to give IT or whatever delivery group you're in time to address their DevOps process. So now you're probably asking, okay, this is all great. How can we assess it? Now, some of you might have filled out the 4-question survey beforehand that goes into DevOps maturity. That's a great starting point, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But there's 3 things I want you to think about when you assess it, not just the whole 5-step maturity model, but think about these 3 things, right? Speed, quality, and security. And let me talk about each one of them. So speed, how fast you're releasing and how much gets released, all right? If you're releasing 10 times a day, but you're releasing 1 line of code that does nothing 10 times a day, so you have 10 lines of code that still does nothing, you might think that's fast, but ultimately it's not really releasing very much, right? So it's not a benefit to the business. So the question, but ultimately, if you're taking 5 months to deliver, 500 Apex classes and 400 custom fields, that's probably too much change for the business to absorb at one point. So you have to find that balance. So the balance is how much you're releasing, how fast you're releasing. Is it slowly and very, very large, or is it rapidly and incremental? And by incremental, I mean incrementally usable features for your business. All right, that's where you really want to be. You don't want to be pushing change. You don't want to wait months and months to push massive changes on your end users that automatically kind of reject it as they go, because it's just too much change for them to deal with. End users are actually very comfortable dealing with fast, incremental, small changes, a few fields, a new process, a flow, a trigger, 1 or 2 things at a time. It's very easy for an end user to absorb and understand and be able to basically adopt those changes. You wait months and months and months with a static system, and then you deliver a whole bunch of new features. There's a good chance they'll reject it, even if it is the right thing, or even if it does work. It's going to take a lot of work of training and getting them over the hump to do that. So you want to be in that rapidly and incremental space, because users will accept that. Quality. How often are bugs found in production, or newly delivered capabilities go unused? People don't think about that when they think about quality. They think about, oh, does it work or doesn't it work? Well, there's more than just that, right? There's did I deliver what the business needs to be successful, right? Or did I miss the mark? Right? If you've delivered something in production and you've spent a lot of time and effort and the company's money to get it there, right? If it doesn't do what the business need, it's a massive waste for everybody. So you need to understand when you talk about quality, it's, do those capabilities that I'm delivering go used or unused, right? And are we measuring that? So, how often does that happen? Is it often that you deliver stuff that's buggy or unused, or is it very rarely? As you move up that model, you should see rarely is the goal and the key there. And then security. Security is not necessarily just about code security, but it's also about how much risk ultimately is there in your process. Are there delays right? When you deliver stuff that's not useful, there's going to be delays. Or if you are in UAT and you find that it misses the mark, there's still a little bit of delays, a little bit less than production, but there's always some delays there. Are you losing time? Do you have to rewrite a lot of code? Is there data loss? That's a big security concern. Have you lost data because something wasn't coded correctly, or an end user had way too much permission, over permissioned a certain set, and they were able to delete something they shouldn't do, maybe even by accident, not even malicious, right? Or do you have an area where it's smooth, secure delivery, business as usual, we deliver on a regular cadence, and our end users are adopting those features, and we don't have to worry about security because it's being scanned with our posture management tool. So when you think about where you are on that scale, think about these three things: speed, quality, and security. There's also another aspect to this, and that's, how do core development teams, not just Salesforce development teams, but any development teams, track metrics? They use something called DORA, which comes from the DevOps Research and Assessment. This is a kind of an open source assessment that Google put out a number of years ago that consists of 4 metrics that basically kind of encompass what I've talked about here. I'll be honest with you, it's a starting point, but it's a very good starting point. All right, the 4 metrics are deployment frequency, mean lead time for changes. That means how long does it take to get from idea to production, right? Mean time to recover. So when there is an incident, not that anybody in here has ever coded a bug or anything like that, I'm sure, but when there is an incident, how long does it take you to recover? And then how often is your change failure rate? So there's a number of metrics here that can help you really kind of determine where you sit. And it's a really good starting point for thinking about how we track our metrics. And if you're not tracking at least these 4 metrics, you need to start doing that immediately. Flosum has a plugin directly in our product. If you use our product, you can download an additional add-on for free that will show you what your DORA metrics are. And it's a great place to start and start plotting yourself on that maturity model. Now, after you've kind of answered those, I talked about speed, quality, and security, and then the DORA metrics here, that's a good start. But then there's a lot of other questions that you can ask the team. And I really recommend that you work together with your team and start asking these questions. I'm not going to ask you all these questions right now. This is good. We have a little bit later session around the maturity model breakout. But these are some kind of in-depth questions, I would say, that you want to start asking your team. And what's really funny is I've done this with a number of development teams. You start asking the developers and they'll come up with different answers. And part of it becomes an alignment exercise. And that's good. It's okay. Don't get worried. Don't get concerned that you have wildly different answers. The goal would be to then come together as a team and determine, okay, what is the right perspective, and then align around that. So these are some really in-depth questions that get you a little bit further to determining where your maturity model is. So next steps from here, right? What should you do? What is your takeaway? What do you do with all this information? So first step, review your maturity model with your teams. Kind of level set on, here is a maturity model, lay it out. Right? Don't ask them where we are. Just lay it out and have them understand it. It's really important that everybody is level set on what is the maturity model and what does it look like. You start building your assessment, right? You answer the DORA, you look at the DORA questions, you think about speed, you think about quality, you think about security. And then you start answering some of those more in-depth questions that I showed you, right? Then you bring the team together. And based on your research, you determine your maturity, right? You level set with your team, where you are, and then you figure out where you want to go, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do everything in the order that I put it in, right? It's a matter of what is a priority for you, your team, your organization, what will move the needle. So you determine where you go, and then from there you build your transformation plan. So you have a plan to develop a roadmap that accelerates you along the path on your maturity model. How do we move up the stages? And that plan, like any good plan, should have KPIs. What are we hoping to accomplish? It could just be faster, smaller, more incremental releases. That's a great KPI. You can measure that, especially with DORA metrics. It could be you want more secure, less bugs in production, delivering higher quality code. Okay, those are all great metrics. I'm not saying you should use every single one of them. Pick 2 or 3 that's going to work for you that will help you move along. And maybe those metrics change at different phases of your plan. So you should have a detailed transformation plan to get to where you're going. So those are the next steps. I'm going to pause here because I think we have a few extra minutes, right? Yeah. For any questions you have about my maturity model or about the assessment that I put forth? No?
So who hasn't taken the maturity? Has everybody taken here? So Chris, should we call about the breakout session?
Yeah, so we'll have a breakout session. We'll have two breakout sessions actually, right? I'll on this side of the room, I'm gonna work on the maturity model, and I'll show you the 4-question quiz that we can take, and we can take it a few times, and we'll get everybody kind of aligned as to where they are. And then on the other side, we'll have Ilvar here to do a code analysis.
Go through testing.
Automated testing. So Profile's a partner. They're really great. So you can go either one in our breakout. But do we have any questions from the room? I'm not saying there's a prize, but there might be a prize for someone who asks a question. Yeah, okay. You can ask a question, but you don't get the prize. It's your book. So.
Just at a high level, I think first of all, great presentation. This really helps a lot, and it's very similar to some of the thoughts like you were thinking about. But how do you kind of explain like the DORA and security model? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for those of you online, the question was around how do you bring together the DORA and security model? I will definitely concede that the DORA, the assessment itself built by Google was really well before anybody started thinking about DevSecOps. So it lacks, frankly, any sort of security piece into it. And that is definitely, I would say, a missing leg to DORA. It almost doesn't even talk about security. It talks about bugs and failure, but that's not security. So I think we need probably, as a DevOps, culture, we need to think about what are the same kind of DORA metrics for security. It's a great question. I don't think I have a great answer for you because I haven't seen that defined yet. I know, from a Salesforce perspective, our tool will help you kind of do a posture management. You get to set those guardrails. And it alerts you if someone goes outside those guardrails. But I don't know if that's a good, it's not an assessment tool, that's a monitoring tool. Yeah. So I agree that, there is a missing piece there for DORA.
Yeah, and I think where I would have hoped, by the way, this is a great answer because I didn't have one either. But I think this also signifies how a tool can help you find more. It's kind of like you can either you can walk on the beach and try to find metal, or you can walk with a metal detector and find whatever you want to find. And, just the idea was that, DORA has that, metrics, but there's so much you can find with the tool that Chris was mentioning right now that he can't even explain right now all this stuff. And, I've noticed this firsthand when I've implemented Flosum in any client, we found other things that we brought to the client saying, by the way, you kind of probably got it for this, but here are the 5 other things we found. Yeah, which also helps you. So that was maybe.
I think what I said earlier about end users are accepting of small incremental changes, but struggle with large changes, especially if they take a long time. That's true of developers too, right? When they implement Flosum, I can see it in their eyes. There's just so much that it's it can be hard to adopt. So we've developed an implementation process where you slowly adopt the features over time. But we do, unfortunately, they're all there for them to use. So it can be a lot to adopt. So that's good. Did I see a question here?
Yeah, sure. So now I have a 2-parter question.
Okay, great.
The first one is that's the statistic that you just mentioned about this incremental. I would love to, if you can double down on it and just where exactly did you get that? Because I am on a journey of building the Salesforce application. I want to learn from it, and perhaps I'm not going to give that larger chunk of functionality. That's part one, I think. Part two is that in your presentation, at least there was at least implied that it's an organization that already has some kind of a DevOps process. What about, let's say, someone who's starting from greenfield? How they can just start right?
Yeah.
What they should do.
Great question, Daniel. Let's get him up. Daniel, we get him a book. Yeah, because he was brave enough to ask a question. So it was a 2-parter, but you still only get 1 book. Sorry. So the first question, really is, I don't have necessarily metrics to back up the incremental versus the large. It's just my experience. I worked in implementation for many years before I joined Salesforce. And I saw it firsthand, a lot of customers were coming over from homegrown systems or like Siebel or Oracle systems over to Salesforce. And even though I know unequivocally, Salesforce is a better tool. Like that, I have the statistics on that. #1 CRM in the world. People were just rejected because it's different, right? And it's a change, and it's a big change. You go from Oracle to Salesforce is a massive change. You go from a Windows or a homegrown system, it's a massive change. And just as humans, we're kind of wired to kind of reject change. We just want what we have, right? Especially if you don't put in a really lot of training up front, right? And that can be actually laborious. But then you take that same system, and if you could do this, there's no real good way to do this. But if you could just if you could take Oracle and just like carve out little pieces and put little Salesforce in it and slowly move it over time, you could actually get to where you want to go faster, right? Because it's small, it's incremental, and they can absorb it easier. When someone rejects change, it's not so much about the change you're trying to make, it's that it's hard for them to absorb that. And that's why the most successful, that's why I think Agile has been more successful. It's not so much that it's so fast or lets you release more, it's because it's incremental, right? And an end user can adopt incremental changes quickly. If I know every week I'm going to get a new field or maybe, a new piece of functionality, and it's just like one little thing that I have to absorb, it's very easy. And someone can shoot me an email. I don't need to sit in 3 hours worth of training, right, to learn this new system. So that's really based on my experience. I don't know if someone here has a different experience, then please share, but that's kind of the way I see it. And listen, when you're doing an implementation project, like we just talked about, even implementing Flosum, there's so much you can do with Flosum. There's so much capabilities, pre-deploy fix, override protection, one-click rollback. That's my favorite feature. There's just a lot there. And even for developers, it can be difficult. And I've seen them fight because they want to go back to their old ways. They want to do it. They're like, I could have just done this with change sets. I get that all the time. But then, it becomes a process of having to teach them and do some training, right? Because it's a big change. It's kind of like a boil the ocean type of change. But when we do our releases, right? We do 3 releases a year, just like Salesforce. And we don't have pages and pages of release notes like Salesforce. We're usually releasing maybe 5 to 10 new features. That's actually very easy for our customers to adopt, right? So that's the difference between large change and slow, large, and fast and incremental. So that's your first question. Your second question was
Starting greenfield.
starting greenfield. So that's where you're at the base. So you're at the base. I would say a lot of customers or a lot of people that are at the base, they don't even know they're at the base because they don't see the forest for the trees. They don't know that there's more. They're just like trying to, typically at this point, you're not even thinking about DevOps. You're thinking about how do I implement Salesforce and how do I implement it, right? My best suggestion is take a step back and think about where you want to go with Salesforce, and then how can the DevOps process that you want to put in place support that, right? And it can be a little bit of a 2 steps backwards, to take, a big giant leap forwards. But that's what I would recommend. Some of the least successful Salesforce projects, or just IT projects I've seen, are ones that just focus on getting something to production and getting it done, right? The more successful ones are the ones that think about, okay, how are we going to take our user stories and build a process that we can repeatedly use to get those user stories from, creation to testing to UAT to production, right? And a lot of net new implementations don't really think about that. And typically those are the ones that are not successful, right? Because if you can build it, in theory, every time you do a Salesforce implementation, you're doing a DevOps implementation. You just might not think you are, right? And if you do it right, you can leave the customer with a DevOps process that they can just continually use from the day they started till, forever, basically.